911, what's your emergency?
I'm freaking out. I can't stop watching these videos. This guy won't let me turn it off.
Sir, what are you talking about?
He's this big bald guy. He keeps raising his hands up in the shape of horns. What is that about?
Oh boy, we've got a code 666.
What the hell is that?
Mother, man.
Welcome back. I've got a new video series for you to sink your teeth into, and it's called Crime Scene Comparison. The name is self-explanatory, kind of like murder, metal, mayhem. I'd like to compare crimes to prove a point and shine some light on questions that we have. The phrase history repeats itself is applicable to true crime as well. Now, do me a favor before we go any further, hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you're not already a subscriber. Those things help immensely, and they are both free. So thanks for doing that. I've been doing the Murder Metal Mayhem podcast now for 8 years, and we've done at least 260 episodes. I can attest that most homicides have a lot of similarities. It's the subtle differences that help solve those crimes. Looking back at the cases from multiple angles is key to shaking facts loose that could turn up as clues on your murder board. Now, I want to be clear that I have not worked for law enforcement of any kind and have not had any formal education studying true crime. I graduated high school and went to college for 1 year before going out into the real world and getting a job. But I've had a penchant for true crime for about as long as I can remember. And many of you have heard me talk about my childhood in the Bronx during the Son of Sam's reign in the city. And that's where it all began for me nearly 50 years ago. Do you remember when the Idaho 4 crimes went down in November of 2022? And the Moscow Police Department told the world the crimes were targeted? Of course, the obvious question was, what about the scene? Who was targeted, and how do we know that? And we were just told, you're just going to have to trust us on that one. I know we all remember that. And those words would end up haunting law enforcement with an endless supply of memes that mocked them. Now, let's talk about comparisons. So, how does the supposed gory crime scene in Moscow, Idaho, compare to the gruesome Sharon Tate scene in sunny California? Now, my mind conjures up many images when I think about the Sharon Tate scene. The fact that she was pregnant just added to the horror of the situation. I remember my mom was reading Helter Skelter about the Manson murders when I was a young kid. And there was a section of pictures in the book that really fascinated me and piqued my interest in true crime. Now, those messages in blood on the walls of the Los Angeles home of actress Sharon Tate and her husband and movie director Roman Polanski sent chills up my spine. It just freaked me out. I mean, I was probably around 10 years old. My parents wouldn't let me read that kind of stuff at 10, so I had to sneak a look now and then, reading the book several years later. It was much different back then in the 1970s, that's for sure. Now, I used the messages on the wall like the one that I used in my own novel, which was called Six. It was written a few years ago and was unpublished. I had some edits I needed to do, and was a lot of work needed to get it done, and I moved on to something else. But I was just fascinated by that, and I've hung on to it and wanted to make some changes and eventually publish the book under a different title. But the messages on the wall, definitely something eerie about the attacker using the blood of the attacked to speak to anyone who entered that homicide scene. It's kind of deep, really, when you think about it. I mean, because blood is sacred in many cultures, provides significant overtones and dogma, and it can signify both life and death at the same time. It's very, very unique. Now, even the misspellings in the words the Manson family members left on some of their wall writings that night added to that creep factor. They were trying to incite a race war, which is what Charles Manson had been filling their heads with back at the deserted Spahn Ranch, where they consumed a mountain of party favors and listened to music and Charlie, his own music that he played for them. And with Charlie's history of being in and out of prison, jail, and reformatories, he built himself into a grifter who learned how to survive in the world the only way he knew how. He had the gift of gab, and those teenagers were like shooting fish in a barrel for him. And Charles Manson used that in such a heinous way, really, really sad way. Now, when it comes to the Idaho 4, we don't know what the crime scene looked like. I mean, we've been told, but with Manson, we heard about the details of what police saw when they arrived to the both of the scenes in the newspapers. August 9th with the Tate home, and then August 10th with the La Bianca residence in 1969. Back-to-back nights. I mean, just brutal. Horrible stuff with plenty of gore, like something, like Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers would unleash. I mean, this was some shocking stuff to a time, where there's all this peace and love in the air. It was a strange, strange time. Now, we've been told by law enforcement that the scene inside was horrendous and gory in Moscow. This was confirmed by Kathy Mabbitt, the Latah County coroner, nearly 6 hours after the 911 call was placed. Now, she was interviewed and confirmed the scene was bad, but yet 6 hours before she got there, 4 of the college students were at 1122 King Road and calling 911. And the call doesn't sound even real to me, but that's a whole nother video for another day. But no one in the 911 call mentioned any red bodily fluid being everywhere, with 4 attacks like this. Kathy Mabbitt described the wounds as rips and tears. No one on the call mentioned the overwhelming smell of the other bodily fluids, like the metallic or coppery smell of blood. Plus, you have the urine and the feces. Really, really horrendous. But these things would have, been there for at least 8 hours by noon when they called 911. And that was, of course, due to that strange delay that doesn't make any sense. In other words, the odors in the house and the amount of red fluid on 2 of the 3 floors in the home would have made it incredibly obvious to anyone who entered what had happened there. Something had died in that house. Now, how did that happen? It's neat and normal at noon, but 6 hours later, it looked like the kill floor at the end of the shift in the slaughterhouse. I mean, that makes no sense at all. Something changed during those 6 hours, and the fact that the Moscow police officers who arrived at the scene turned down EMTs who showed up is incredibly sketchy. An EMT I spoke to in our community here said that simply doesn't happen. So they normally would welcome the help to see if anybody could be saved. So why would they have turned those EMTs away in Idaho? What were they hiding for 6 hours before allowing the coroner to enter? Lots of questions. Now, common sense tells you that they're hiding something in Idaho. What is the purpose of a non-dissemination order for this case? I mean, it's better known as a gag order. But if you were talking about a case involving national security, then I could see keeping it buttoned up, nice and tight. But in this case, it doesn't make any sense. Unless there's something major they're not telling us, it makes absolutely no sense. The trial will be starting in mid-August, and either this house of cards set up by the prosecutor collapses, or the fix is truly in and the jury convicts him like mindless robots. Now, when it comes to the Sharon Tate case, the targeted attack was obvious due to the messages on the walls, as I mentioned earlier. This was 1969 in a period of great civil unrest here in the United States. There were constant protests going on. We're talking about the peak of the Vietnam War, as well as a tumultuous decade for the assassinations with RFK, JFK, and Martin Luther King. Messages like pig and death to pigs, as well as rise and helter skelter, were meant to start the great race war that Charlie had predicted after becoming obsessed with the Beatles' White Album. Their song Helter Skelter became like a war cry and became the new way of thinking and the way he would describe this war that was going to happen. And he believed that the Beatles were telling him to start the war. And in Charlie's vision of this, the war would be between the black and white citizens, and then he would be out in the desert, survive the war, and then would come out of the desert as the leader of the entire civilization. I mean, it's disturbing to say the least, but that's what he claimed he believed. But, he convinced his followers, the family, to commit grisly crimes and put those messages up to convince law enforcement and the media and the public that the war had started, and to scare the white population into assuming the crimes were committed by blacks since the victims were wealthy and white. Now, this is nonsense, and Charlie was preaching this stuff to the family, and unfortunately, they believed it. Now, when it comes to the Idaho 4 case, we are confused because of the gag order. Those messages in the Manson case were known right up front. We saw photographs of them in the newspapers and magazines at the time, not with the Idaho 4. So we're left to speculate and conjecture about what Moscow PD meant when they said it was a targeted attack. Who was the target? And how do you know who the target was? I mean, this is simple, obvious questions. Now, the night after the Tate crimes, where the 5 victims were found spread out all over the property, the Manson family attacked the home of a wealthy family of grocers in Los Angeles, the LaBiancas. They did much of the same carnage and left even more messages on the walls. The LaBianca couple were the 2 victims there, so a total of 7 at this point. And this catapulted Charlie and his family into the stratosphere. Every magazine and newspaper carried the story of the tiny hippie preacher turned madman cult leader. Now, of course, we didn't have a second night after the Idaho 4, which was good, at least that we know of. Now, we'd be left with, we're just left with the 4 victims here. But what about the questions about who was the target? And how do you know that they were targeted? Were there messages written on the walls, like in the Manson case? Or did they leave a note behind, like in John Benet Ramsey's death? Or was it something else? Law enforcement never told us. The PCS didn't mention anything like messages on the walls or a note left behind. So we're just left to wonder, what do they mean by a targeted attack? Was it a hit related to party favors and lots of money? It's very possible. The only thing I could think of that would single out any one of the victims in the Idaho 4 are the excessive wounds that Kaylee endured, more than 50 of them. And that's personal stuff. That's not a random intruder. or possibly the wounds on Ethan's legs that we've heard about from the court documents. They seem to have more of a calling card from the attacker who did those designs in his flesh. Sounds horrible. Yet, in the heat of battle, that stuff may have gone differently as planned. So we just don't know. And if it was a hit over an argument related to narcotics and money, then any one of them could have possibly been involved. We just don't know. Now, in the trial led by prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi in the Manson case, they used those signs of targeted attacks to help explain the motive behind the crimes. Manson's cocky attitude helped convict him, especially since he didn't commit those 7 crimes. Those were done by his minions. And with the case of the Idaho 4, we have no idea what the motivation was or if they were really targeted. We're only 2 months from the trial, and that's not much time. So will a jury convict Bryan Kohberger with such little evidence, especially if some of it doesn't mean a thing when it comes to experts that may debunk what they've got? Or will he go the way of Charlie, or even worse? Now, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this one. So drop a comment below. Let me know if you like this new idea, because I've got other episodes in mind to do just like this. It helps the channel grow. Doesn't cost a thing if you leave a comment. I also will be doing a live this Thursday. That's June 26th at 7 p.m. Central here on this channel. We'll be talking Idaho 4. Going to be talking with my friend in the Devil's Advocates about the Idaho 4. So it should be great. Don't miss it. Big thanks to all the members in the Horntie Club and the Mayhem Squad. You guys are amazing. Welcome to the membership. I do appreciate all of you, though, that watch the videos. Without you all as a group, this would not be possible. Now, if you want to join the Horntie Club, it's just $1.99 a month. And now we've got the Mayhem Squad for $2.99. Get your Murder Metal Mayhem VIP treatment with members-only videos, pictures of Horntie Studios, members-only update messages, and more. And I kept the prices low on purpose. But please don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.